Thank you for joining our first Apache Apex technical webinar. Today's topic is on building your first Apache Apex application. For those who are not familiar with Apache Apex is a Yarn native streaming analytics platform. It is fault tolerant, high performance, and highly scalable. We open sourced back in August, and we're getting a lot of momentum in the development. And now we have our 3.2 release. So our speaker Ram today will walk you through on how to build your first Apache Apex application with a few pointers. Without further ado, I want to hand the speaker to our speaker today, Ram.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and good evening to any of you who might be in a different time zone where it's evening already. There's a lot of ground to cover, so I'm going to go quickly through the presentation and the initial parts so we can cover all the topics that I have planned. And at the end, we will have a QA session where you can ask any questions that you might have. Okay, so here's an outline of today's presentation. We'll cover the main concepts of what an Apex application looks like. Then we'll show a brief description of what the application we're building today looks like. We'll then do a hands-on demonstration of how to clone the Apex source code repositories and how to build them. We will then use the Maven archetype command to create a new application template. We'll then copy over some source files that I have already prepared just to save some time into the new application template. We'll then build the application and run it. And then finally, I'll do a code walkthrough of some of the source files, and then we'll wrap up with questions. Okay, so Apex applications consist of operators, which implement the operator interface. Each operator can have any number of input and any number of output ports. And operators are connected to one another by streams to form what's called a directed acyclic graph, which is sometimes abbreviated as just a DAG. The usefulness of this sort of design for the application is in the fact that these operators can each run in their own JVM on a separate node in the cluster, thereby acting as a force multiplier and giving you scalability. An operator can extend the base operator class, which gives you sort of default empty implementations of all the functions that are required by the operator interface. And within the operator, you define fields for the input and output ports. And those ports themselves can be implemented by using the default input port and the default output port classes that are also provided as part of the platform. The application class implements the streaming application interface. And within that interface, there's one method called populate DAG, which within that method, you'll have to write a few lines of code just linking the output ports of operators to the input ports of the downstream operators. And once that's done, your application is ready to go. Applications process data within time-based windows. So there's typically callbacks called begin window and end window, separated by about half a second. So the typical streaming window, as we call it, is defaults to half a second, but of course that's all changeable on a per application basis if the need arises. The sorted word count application monitors an input directory, and you can drop a text file in there, and what it will do is process that text file, compute all the word counts of all the words that occur in that file, and then write an output file into the configured output directory with 1 line per word, showing you both the word and the frequency of that word. And that list will be sorted in descending order, so the most frequent words will appear at the top of the output file. There are 5 operators involved: a line reader which reads lines from the file, a word reader that splits each line into words using a regular expression, a window word count which computes word frequencies within a streaming window. Remember, in the previous slide, I mentioned a half-second streaming window. So this thing will compute the frequencies in each window and then emit the results on the output port. That data goes to the file word count operator, which accumulates all the word counts for all the windows, and it gets a notification from the line reader saying that the end of file has been reached. When that happens, it will then emit the sorted word count on its output port, and finally the word count writer will write the list to the file. Here's the DAG that shows you the 5 operators we just talked about and how they're connected. So the line reader sends lines to the word reader, which sends words to the window word count, which sends word frequencies to the file word count, which sends the final results to WC Writer, which then writes the results to a file. So I'm going to stop the slides right here and move on to the hands-on part of the presentation. Oh, what happened here? Okay. All right. So a quick word about the environment. I'm running in a VirtualBox virtual machine that's running Ubuntu Linux with Apache Hadoop installed on the system directly from the Apache release. And you can see if I do, if I run this hdfs dfs ls command on the root directory, it should show you that there's nothing there. So hdfs, this is a way of checking that hdfs is working okay. Another way is to go to the browser and look at the local port 8088. That shows you the management console for Hadoop. You can see it shows no applications running. And then this is port 50,070 is the management console for Yarn. So Apache Apex is built on Yarn. It's a native Yarn application. Okay, so we go here to the main directory, and I'm going to create a whole new directory called Apex, and step into it, and we're going to do all our work over there. So first what we'll do is check out the source code repositories for the 2 components of Apache Apex. So the first component is Apex Core, which is the core platform, and the URL for that, I've saved it in a local variable called A. You can see it's github.com Apache Incubator Apex Core.git. The second part is called Mulhar, Apache Mulhar, and that's a library of pre-built operators, which has many operators and many connectors to all sorts of standard systems like Kafka's, JMS message queues, various SQL and NoSQL databases, and so forth. So if you need an operator, there's a very good chance that it's already in that library. And the URL for that is very similar, Incubator Apex Malhar instead of core. So the first thing to do is to verify that you have the Java JDK, which is of course needed to compile the source code, and Maven, which is the build tool that we use, and Git, which is used to clone the repositories. So if you just do java c dash version, it should show you the version that confirms Java JDK is installed. And just to be sure, you could also do the same with Java version. That shows you the Java version. Maven dash version shows you the version of Maven that's installed. And finally, Git dash version should show you the version of Git that's installed. If any of these are not installed, you would need to install them before proceeding further. Okay, so the way you check out the repositories is git clone and then the URL. So as before, I have it in a variable $a, so I just type that to save some typing. You can see Git is working, it's pulling the files down, and once it's done, you should see a directory called Incubator Apex Core. There we go, we see the new directory. Now I'll do the same thing with Malhar. This will, again, take about a minute or so, a few seconds longer than core because there's a lot more files in here. So while that's happening, let me mention another Git repository. We've got in github.com a repository called examples. We will be checking that out as well shortly once this is done. And that repository has a variety of shell scripts and sample files that are used in some of the tutorials, including like this webinar. So that's worth cloning and browsing through, because you may find that some of the shell scripts are useful to save you a few keystrokes. Okay, it's still chugging away. Either the network or the remote server must be a little slow today. Okay, it seems to be very bursty, speeding up and then slowing down a little bit, but we're almost done. Okay, here we go. So we now have the two repositories cloned. Let me also clone the examples repository that I was talking about. It's under DataTorrent. There we go. All right, so we'll now step into the core first. And you can see there's the file called pom.xml. That's the build file, the Maven build file that controls how the repository is built. So we'll now build this, and the common way to build with Maven is Maven clean install, and I usually add the -d skip tests because the unit tests can take a long time to run, and we don't really need to run the unit tests for this particular build. Okay, so the build is going on. While that happens, let me switch to a different console window, step into the same directory that we just created, and look at this examples directory. Under examples, there's a directory called tutorials. Under which there's top-end words, under which there is scripts. If you look in there, you'll see something called build Apex. So all the steps that we just performed, checking that the versions of Java, Java-C, Maven, and Git are installed and available, downloading the code repositories and building them, all of that is built into that build Apex script. So if you like, you can just run that script. There's also an aliases file there, which is right here. I've highlighted it. So that defines some shell aliases that'll save you some keystrokes for working with HDFS. So for example, we just saw this HDFS DFS ls command when we started. So similar aliases for commands looking at the input directory and the output directory relevant to this application, as well as for copying an input file into the input directory. Those aliases are defined in that file. So I'll just cat it to the console so you can see it. So there's the aliases. So our application is going to use an HDFS directory called temp test input dir and an output directory called temp test output dir. And I've defined commands for listing the contents of the input directory, listing the contents of the output directory, removing all files from the input directory, removing all files from the output directory, and ignore the DTCLI part for now. That's old stuff that I need to take out. And then a shell function called putFile, which takes an argument and just copies it into the input directory. So I'm just going to source that file so that we have these aliases available. Now if I type, for instance, alias ls input, you'll see it shows you the alias that I've just defined. Okay, let's go back to the previous console, and there we see that the build of Apex Core is successful. I'm going to go to the Mulhar directory and do the same thing. And run the same command over here. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that this install, some people may get nervous about that. It's not really installing anything into your system directories. All it's doing is installing these various jar files into the local users repository that's typically in the .m2 directory of the user's home directory. So it's installing only to this user's home directory, not to the system. So you don't need to be super user or root when you run this command. Okay, here we go. Okay, so while that's going on, let's go back to this console here and look at this file. There's a file called new app. So new app is all it does is just run a Maven command with the appropriate archetype arguments to create a new project template. And we'll use that template to build our application. I could run this, but I just want to wait until we finish this build here, just to avoid interfering with it, because both may try to download some necessary packages and install them into the local repository at the same time. It's not usually a problem, but I just want to be a little careful about that. You can see all these downloading parts. So Maven is smart enough, for those of you who are not familiar with Maven, to look at all the dependencies that are listed and download them and install them into your local repository. So the very first time you do this, it can take several minutes because of all these dependencies that it has to download from the net. And you will certainly need to be connected to the internet to do this. But once the initial Maven build is done, you can be offline and still be able to build the projects. Okay, it has just a few more seconds to go. Just building the demos directory. The demos directory is, I would strongly recommend that people go into that directory in Malhar and browse the various applications. There are a number of applications there. One that gets live data from Yahoo Finance, stock quotes and stuff, and analyzes them. There's one that analyzes a Twitter stream. And there's a couple of other variants of word counting applications. So there's lots of good examples in the demos directory that exercise different parts of the platform. And if you're just getting started with Apex, that's definitely the place to start. Okay, so this build is completed. So that shows that we've built now both the core and the Malhar library code bases. So let's come back here, and here's this new app script. I'm just going to run that to create my new application template. You can just run bash and give it the file name, and it should create an application in the directory called My Apex App. There's the build success. And if I do an ls, you'll see there's the directory that says My Apex App. So I'm going to step in there. And if we look, we have that pom.xml that is the build file. If we now look for Java files in here, you'll see that there's 3 Java files. One is in the test directory, and that's a unit test file. We don't really need that, so I'm just going to move that file over to the /temp directory, because sometimes it gets in the way when you do a Maven build. If you forget to do the skip tests, it'll start to run the unit tests, and that generates a lot of output and is not really useful in this particular instance. So I'm just going to move that out to /temp, so you can even delete it if you like. The other 2 are templates for a simple skeleton of an application that just generates random numbers and prints them out. So they can be present, or you can remove them. It doesn't matter either way. So I'm just going to leave them there. The new application we build will put the files for it in the same directory. So you can have multiple applications in the same Maven project. So the files that we need in order to save time, as I mentioned before, I have them already in the examples directory. So if we look at the examples tutorials top N, I've got a directory called webinar over there. If we look at what's there, you'll see there's a few Java files for the operators we talked about. I'm going to copy those Java files over here. There you go. So we have the original two files, but also a bunch of other files for the new application. There's also in the examples directory, there's this XML file that specifies properties for this application. So we need to put that in the meta-inf directory. So if we go into resources, you'll notice there's already a properties.xml, and that's for the template application that it generated. But what we're going to do is we're going to copy the new file, which is properties-sortedwordcount.xml. So if your application is named XYZ, you can put a properties file here named properties-xyz, and that properties file will take effect. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the main top-level directory of my new application and run a Maven command to build the whole thing. Clean. This time I'm going to do package because I don't really need this application installed in my repository, and the same -d skip tests. Okay, while it's doing that, we're going to, once the application builds, we're going to run it using the DTCLI program, which is part of core. And what this is a command line tool to run applications. So I'm going to run that tool. And here in the other console, you see my application has finished building. And once it's finished building, it creates the APA file in the target. So we will launch the application by saying launch target / and then name the APA file. So once it finishes, okay, so here it shows you the two applications. My first application is the default that it generated, and number two is the sorted word count, which is the new files that we just copied over. So we select two because we want that one to run. and it'll launch the application, and it'll show you the application ID. So this great big long string is the application ID. Okay, so the application is now running, and I'm going to go back here and create create the input and output directories that the application needs. So the hdfs command, the various commands try to mimic the standard Linux commands for doing things like creating directories. So you use makedir. In this particular case, it failed because I forgot to give it the -p option. So if I give it -p, the -p tells it to create all the intermediate directories. It should this time successfully create the input directory. Now I do the same thing and create the output directory. Okay, so those directories are created, and recall we now have aliases for listing them to save some typing. So if I do ls input, it should show me nothing because there's nothing in the input directory. Same for the output directory. Okay, so now in order to run the application, I'm going to drop a text file into the input directory. I have a text file here in my directory called data. It's called Gutenberg Encyclopedia.txt. This is a large text file of about 8 megabytes downloaded from the Gutenberg project on the net. So we will use the shell function put file that we just saw from the aliases file, and then give it the path to the text file. Okay, so that should drop the text file into the input directory. Now if I do an ls input, it should show that directory in the input directory. There we go. So the input directory does indeed have the input file we just dropped in there. Let's now do an ls on the output directory to see if it's created the output file that we're expecting. And you'll see there is an output file, but it's got this odd name with a timestamp and a .tmp extension on it. That's because it's a temporary file that it's created while the application continues to work. So it should be done in a few seconds. Let's try that ls output again. And there we go. So it's created the file with the same name containing the word counts into the output directory. Now if I do hdfs dfs-cat of this output file, it'll have a lot of words in it. So I'm going to pipe it to head and say 15 so that it just prints the top 15 lines. We don't want to flood the console with data from that file. So this should show you the top 15 words, and there you go. As expected, the article "the" is the most common in that file, followed by the various words like and of and in and to and so forth. So that concludes the demonstration of how to run your application. I think I've kind of run out of time for the code review, so maybe in answer to one of the questions I could do a bit of the code review, but I'm going to stop at this point.
Okay, Ram. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. Before we go to Q&A, I want to mention a couple of things. Since we're building a community to support each other, we would like for you to join the community if you haven't. One way to join and contribute to the community is to join the dev mailing list. You can easily go to our Apache Apex community page, and there is a link to subscribe to our dev mailing list. And also, there's a LinkedIn group that you can join as well, and it's called Global Apache Apex Enthusiasts Group. You can easily find that on LinkedIn group, and we will provide these links to you offline as well. So in this case, I want to actually open up for Q&A. If you have any questions, please feel free to type into the questions panel, or I will see how I can actually unmute the audience. I'm unmuting you as I speak right now. So if you want to speak, please feel free. I'm sorry, the unmuting doesn't work because it's creating too much echo. If you have any questions, please just type into the questions panel, and then we will answer them one by one.
Or if you'd like, you can unmute your particular mic and ask it using audio if you like.
Yes. There's one question about contributing to the group. If you are thinking about committing, like becoming a committer or just contributing to the code, please just write to the dev mailing list, which I'm showing on the screen right now. And then the community will decide where to take this. Right. So let me just quickly go to the URL. So this is the community page for Apache Apex. If you see, you can on top of this page, you can go to the subscribe link, and then it will take you to writing an email to the mailing list, and then you can subscribe. Okay, and also there's a LinkedIn group as well. Let me go there as well, just so that you know where it is. So this is the LinkedIn group that I was referring to. There are some posting about the previous meetups that we had. For example, Pamatic presented on their use of Apache Apex, and then we have some other blogs and technical information. And also, we are recording this session today. So offline, we will be gathering the recording file, and then we'll be sending out the link. Okay, so now there is a another question.
Yeah. So. Integrating. So the question is about integrating Apex and Spark. So I think this question is probably better asked on the dev mailing list, where people knowledgeable about Spark can also contribute. But Apex is from the ground up designed to be a streaming analytics platform. And my understanding is that Spark came from a batch world. So I think for streaming analytics, my personal opinion is that Apex is likely to be better suited simply because it was from the ground up designed for that use case.
Yes, thank you, Ram. Any other questions? Yeah, please feel free to still send us a question. We're gonna be here for another couple of minutes. Okay, so it looks like we ran out of questions. And Ram, thank you so much for your presentation. And I hope that with this presentation, the audience can go back and use the knowledge to build their first Apache Apex application. And in the future, we will have a series of topics that we'll share with you. And please stay tuned. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much. Bye bye.